Boss fights are just so gosh damn awesome. It is something exclusive to gaming platform, so you can't really have a boss fight in a book or even a movie. It wouldn't make any sense at all. But the underlying concept behind fighting boss is already awesome by its own. It is all about presenting the player with insurmountable challenge that they have to overcome. We all remember those epic boss fight moments when you come across an enemy, one that designer of the game considered to be much more difficult than traditional pushover enemy you have been taking out. So by design, the bosses already represent design of something that is much better and much more engaging to the player. We see in action titles like No More Hero, God of War, and Devil May Cry that have all sorts of bosses in the game, and in most of these cases, they are usually the most epic part of those games. So if boss fights are the most engaging part of your game, why not make it an entire game where you fight bosses? Why waste your time hacking and slashing generic enemy when you can come across these well-designed bosses that would test your skill as a player? Well, many games have actually tried, including Titan Soul or Shadow of the Colossus, and you can also argue with things like Punch-Out, or hell, most of the fighting game can be described as such as well. But to me, no game does this better in my eye than Furi. And today I want to take a look at these bosses in Furi, the epic clash of one-on-one action between the player and the bosses. So basically I want to look at how they're designed over the narrative of the game, how the bosses' motivation are uniquely represented through the minimal dialogue in the game, how to create such a flair through the look of the characters that is designed to be the boss in the game, how the mechanics are built to facilitate the boss encounter, and most importantly, how the music adds to the overall experience of the game. This is how you design thematic bosses. Overarching narrative. In Furi, you play as protagonist named the Stranger, whose main goal is to break himself outside of the prison that was designed and built to trap him. With the help of a mysterious bunny man called the Voice, the Stranger, along with his trusty badass Japanese sword and plasma gun, must fight his way through the Guardians, group of difficult and colorful cast of characters who act as the bosses in this game.
Pull yourself together. Get out of prison.
The Stranger would go through a different layer of this futuristic prison, fighting his way through each bosses at a time. This led the designer and writer of the game Baker in France to build an ongoing narrative from the start to the end of the game through each boss encounter. Majority of the narrative of Furi is also presented through these walking sections between bosses, where the Voice would offer expositional dialogue that point out each bosses you're heading to and from. Why this type of exposition dialogue might go against the traditional writing principle of both filming with the whole show don't tell and of gaming with the whole play don't show. Furi succeed in making tell and engaging through the vibe of the game, from its aesthetic look of the world you're walking through, the uniqueness of its writing, the mysterious voice acting quality of the voice presented by David Gassman.
Kill the jailer. Fight for your freedom. The jailer is the key. Kill him, and you'll be free.
And most importantly, the music that accompany all of these sections of the game. For the first time in playing video game, I find myself drawn to the world with simple storytelling through expositional dialogue. There's multiple benefits from designing the walking section in this way. First, it acts as the breathing room between each bosses of the game, which allow the player a much needed break between the intense boss fight that they have overcome. It also let the developer build up player anticipation for the next boss by giving player exposition of the guardian the player is heading toward.
Can you feel it? It's like a dream. The breeze, the peace. Feels like we could take off and leave this place behind us.
Similarly to cutscene in most AAA titles, these walking sections also act as the reward narratively for the player.
Nothing is what it seems. We're stuck here, and the real world is somewhere else, down there.
Player can also automate the walking section by pressing the dash button on the controller, which toggle the automate pathing for this section, which really showcase how much they invest and think through this section. I quickly realized that you can't interrupt the voice line of dialogue. No matter how fast you walk, the distance has been accurately accounted by the developer to assure that the voice line of dialogue would start at a certain point and end before you trigger another line. This really shows how much the game maker care about this dialogue, because I'm sure everyone here have at least played AAA titles with similar walking section before and have sometimes go just a little bit too fast that they end up interrupt the NPC dialogue, or even worse, sometimes skipping them entirely by unintentionally triggering the cutscene.
The old man coming up. There's more to him than meets the eye. A master of time, so they say. But if he's such a master, if he saw it all coming, why didn't he do something about it? Why didn't he stop it from happening? Or at least warn me? But look where we ended up.
Oh, and there's also this particular section where if you automate the stranger walk, his step would actually match with the beat of the music itself, which is pretty fucking rad.
He'll try to play it cool. Easy for him, he chose to be here. But we are definitely not cool with this. We are getting out of here.
The biggest downfall that can potentially hurt the game with this design decision come when you want to replay the game. It would honestly suck to have to go through this section over and over again when you want to replay through the boss's fight in the game. But even in that case, the game maker account for it by implementing an entire speedrun mode dedicated for speedrunner and those looking to replay the game without the walking section. Furi was written by Audrey Rapins, who is also executive producer of the game. During the interview in the making of video of Furi, Rapins talked about the freedom that comes with working in the game maker. Since the team consists of people from different countries, communication is really important but difficult. But one goal that she and her team have always have in mind is to allow themselves freedom to work with different people to make the best game possible.
Dès le début, en se disant qu'on aurait toujours énormément de liberté par rapport avec qui on travaille et par rapport à l'endroit où on travaille. On voulait absolument pas se limiter et se dire allez, on va pas pouvoir travailler avec Nam parce qu'il est à Montréal et que toi tu es à Montpellier, Emeric, et Audrey elle est en Suède. Donc ça a toujours fait partie de l'esprit Game Maker, c'est-à-dire de dire on a envie de travailler avec quelqu'un, peu importe, on va le chercher, on va travailler à distance, on va s'organiser. Tu vois, ça nous a permis de monter Game Makers et à chaque fois d'aller chercher vraiment les gens avec qui on veut bosser, qui ont envie de bosser avec nous sans se soucier d'être tous au même endroit, dans un grand bureau, etc. Alors ça a des forces, cette force-là, de pouvoir choisir avec qui on veut bosser, avoir beaucoup de liberté.
This same parallel can also be drawn to the protagonist of this game. The stranger who is a captive at the beginning of the game must fight his way through these guardians for his own freedom.
Kill the jailer. Fight for your freedom.
Freedom seems to be an ongoing narrative throughout the game. One of the most fascinating parts of the design behind these bosses throughout the game is that they get gradually less evil and more relatable over the course of the game. With each boss that you go through, they just seem to be more and more reasonable toward you. Some give you benefit of the doubt, while another give you a chance to make a choice. Over the course of the game, the boss become a lot less of a monster and a lot more of a human. Someone with goal and aspiration similar to that of the stranger or the player. If we go to the boss chronologically, from the start to the end of the game, the first boss is the Shane, who is by far the worst. He practically enjoyed torturing the stranger by killing him over and over again since the stranger can't be permanently killed. He's practically a monster that goes against everything that you stand for. The second boss is the Trap, who's an insane monster that gets locked up, who is capable of nothing outside of violence and destruction. The third is the Lion, who can control time and willing to spend eternity killing you over and over again and trapping you inside of his dome. But by doing so, he is practically sacrificing his life to trap you inside of his prison to protect others. The fourth is the Scale, while being an insane monster similar to that of the Strap, but in this case, it is not the fault of his own. In fact, when the stranger landed on this particular planet, he exposed the Scale to some sort of radiation substance that drove him mad. So in a way, he is a monster that have been created by the player. The fifth is the Hand, who might be tough toward you, but from his viewpoint, he is merely trying to show his son that a good person who ignores evil is not much better than the evil itself. And most importantly, he wants to protect his home planet for his son.
You can't win. You're alone.
The sixth boss is the Song, who practically gave you a choice to stop fighting altogether, along with all the justification you would ever need to do so.
Stay with me. Why are you leaving? What's not to like here?
The eighth boss is the Burst, a badass sniper who fight you because she enjoyed the challenge, which funnily enough is something that the player can definitely relate it to, since if you come this far in the game, that's one of the driving force for you to play the game. The ninth boss is the Age, who is a badass sensei character who never once poke fun of you despite how much stronger he is, and he would consistently give you a lot of life advice to move forward and get better at fighting him.
You move well. You're reading me quite quickly. Let's see how predictable you think I am now.
And the 10 is the Beat, which I actually did spend an entire video on. She is merely an idealistic kid who wants to protect her people. She literally said that the stranger and her are not so different after all. She not only question your evil intention but also give you benefit of the doubt in the world, and never once judge you for who you were.
I look at you and I don't understand. We're so alike.
It is honestly pretty beautiful to see how there is this gradual change in how the bosses treat you over the course of the game, from the Shane to the Beat. The player gradually pick up more clue over the course of the game that maybe the stranger is not the hero after all, that maybe he don't deserve the freedom he is fighting so hard for.
Tempting, isn't it? Just stay here, close our eyes, forget everything. But this is nothing compared to the real world. This is just a fancy prison that we'll rot in. I need to be alive again, even if I die a minute later.
Character motivation. This section of the video is inspired by a comment left by Igor Alenka in the last video. He pointed out to me that each guardian is designed with motivation behind each of them. So if you're watching this Igor, this section is dedicated for you and it wouldn't exist without you. Now, I mentioned before about the narrative and how it play out over the course of the game by the shift in the attitude of these guardians toward the stranger. What Igor actually pointed out to me, which is much more interesting, is that each bosses actually possess unique motivation that drive them to fight you. To go back to the list of the boss, the Change enjoy the fight. He enjoy fighting you. The Strap is practically insane. The Line want control. The Scale want to revenge you for what you did to him. The Hand want to protect his son. The Song fight you only because you give her no choice. The Burst actually enjoy the challenge. The Age is looking to train you. And the Beat is fighting to find out who you truly are. All of them have their own motivation for fighting you, some better than others, and can easily be considered protagonists of each of their own stories and narrative. To this end, the game maker utilized the motivation behind these characters to create a unique identity to each boss encounter. This adds weight to every bosses the stranger come across, since you are fully aware that the bosses you take down have each of their own motivation that rival that of the strangers. To me, this is what set Furi apart from other boss fight games. Both Titan Soul and Shadow of the Colossus managed to create these incredible boss encounters, but neither managed to create unique identity to their bosses through character motivation.
We all have choices to make. We all have to decide what's worth fighting for.
Visual flair. The visual design in Furi is nothing short of magical. Every new area you come across is worth screenshot to put as your wallpaper. But more importantly, the strength in the visual design of the game also extends to the character design as well. From the stranger to the voice and to all the guardian in the game. There is this unique futuristic neon flare combined with Japanese manga look similar to the stuff you would see in Akira Toriyama work. The game maker achieved this character design flair by working with Takashi Okazaki, a Japanese concept artist who famously worked on the art behind Afro Samurai. Takashi Okazaki described that his character design was heavily influenced by Kendo, a Japanese martial art that used a bamboo sword, which he learned at a very young age, that really helped him with visualizing armor in his work since he understands it to its fundamental level.
それは剣道の影響はすごくありますね。ちっちゃい頃親にやらされてて、すごく嫌いだったんです剣道。なんだけどすごいこう痛いし、だけど今すごくデザインする上で本当に役に立ってて、やっぱり自分でこうその道着、こう袴とかこうそういう防具とかをやっぱつけたことがあるっていうのはやっぱ全然理解度がやっぱ違うなっていうのは思いますね。うん。だからなんかこうやっぱ僕が結構侍もののやっぱそういう自分で漫画を描いたりとか侍ものが好きなのはやっぱり剣道をやってたからっていうのもあると思いますね。
Another strength of Furi visual flair come from the animation quality of each character, which was animated by Jean Christophe, the lead gameplay animation of Furi, who take many inspiration from fighting game titles like Street Fighter.
Ça tombe bien, notre animateur Chris, c'est un grand fan de Street Fighter et ils ont cette espèce de punch dans leurs animes qui donne toute la qualité au jeu, je trouve. Et,
Moi, je suis animateur, donc en fait, le but du jeu, c'est de donner vie à tous les personnages. En fait, Takashi, lui, quand il crée ses personnages, en fait, il va faire quelques sketchs d'attitude, où il va commencer même à, par exemple, pour le héros, il m'avait envoyé des dessins des refs de début d'animation, en fait, avec des poses clés pour les attaques, par exemple, l'attitude générale quand il va marcher, courir, tout ça, pour donner une première attention.
Et avec certaines indications supplémentaires pour m'aider si jamais j'ai pas compris ou s'il y a certaines choses que je connais pas. Ensuite, quelques sketchs de combat avec les trajectoires. Tu vois, du coup, il a juste à faire une pause clé finale. Il monte la trajectoire, mâcher où je dois partir. Bon, là, je vois que c'est la base, le début. C'est quand même surprendre là, en fait. Hop, ouais.
Satisfying combat. The success of Furi design can't be achieved without the sheer simplicity of its combat. The combat was built around very few moves for an action game. The 4 fundamental moves in the game consist of dash, attack, shot, and parry, which can be extended to charge dash, charge attack, charge shot, and punishing enemy after parry. Some movement also change during fencing part of the fight, which remove the shoot button with a build-up charge melee attack instead. These 4 moves can easily be mapped out on a controller along with its respective charge move. On PS4 controller, X is dash, square is attack. Hold X for charge dash, hold square for charge attack. O is for parry, which you can execute the enemy by a simple follow-up attack. Right analog stick is for shooting, and holding R2 would let you shoot up those shots. The simplicity in control make it easy to jump into but hard to master. From the start to the end of the game, the stranger doesn't become stronger through upgrade or progression system. All skill progression come directly from the player ability to utilize existing mechanic in a different scenario that each boss presents. In fact, Mark Brown discussed this in one of his recent videos called Versatile Verbs, which he used to describe when certain simple button input can have multiple applications within the gameplay of the game.
The standing jump, for example, is no more complicated than press A to do B. But in more recent games, the plumber's jump is way more interesting. You can change the length, height, angle, and landing zone. You can transition in and out of different moves and spring off walls and bounce on Koopa shells. Far from press A to do B, this one verb can lead to a massive number of different outcomes.
Furi does this beautifully with its moveset, specifically with its melee attack, dash, and shoot, all three of which can be charged up, which allow the different application in gameplay through the same input. For example, the dash move can be charged up similar to that of a jump in a Mario game. In Mario, the longer you hold the jump button, the higher Mario would jump. Whereas in Furi, the longer you hold the dash button down, the stranger would charge up his dash to cover longer distance. This long dash looks super cool, akin to charge shot in Mega Man X title, and can be utilized by the player to dash through large AoE attack which cover substantial area of the map. Interestingly, in Furi, the stranger dash is dictated by when you release the dash button rather than when you pressed it. This gives the dash the sense of weight when the player pushes it. Unfortunately, this is also where many who are not familiar with the game would complain that the game feels unresponsive. The devs actually point out that this ends up being a double-edged sword, but they end up sticking with it because they believe in this design decision. Apart from the simplicity of the combat, the system was also built similar to that of a fighting games, with focus on back and forth nature of the fight, which hinge around parrying and punishing enemy attack. The player have to learn enemy attack pattern to dash or parry their way out of an incoming attack while finding an opportunity to punish the enemy by stunning them into a combo with the melee attack or shooting them down from a distance. This pushed the player to master the combat in order to overcome the challenge presented by the boss in the game. Which kind of bring me to this guy. The awesome combat design of this game can all be derived from the design principle laid out by this man, Emeric Thoa, the producer and creative director behind Furi.
Quand je serai en lock, si je suis locké en mode sword,
Ouais.
et que je fais ça,
Ça
je fais un mini dash.
Ouais, mais tout petit, moins que le petit dodge qui. Ça serait genre tu gagnerais, je sais pas, 2 frames sur.
Et si je maintiens, je strafe.
Si tu maintiens, si tu fais ça, ça fait un mini dash.
Ouais.
Si tu restes, si tu maintiens, bah, si t'as ton mini dash, et ça tu seras.
J'ai le mini dash et je strafe
Voilà.
après. Donc le mini dash
Comme
est
dans
automatique.
Ouais. Enfin automatique. C'est à toi, faut vraiment y aller quoi. Mais tu vois ce que je veux dire sur Smash Bros.
Je vois ce que tu veux dire.
Bah, franchement, ça serait trop classe quoi. Tu vas t'en faire ça.
C'est ce que je
Mais
fais
faut que
déjà
tu
en
fasses
fait.
vraiment un
Quand
truc.
je joue actuellement, je joue comme ça.
Ah ouais.
Et je dodge. Dodge. Et quand je suis bien, bam bam comme ça.
Emeric Thoa made a blog post a while back describing the design principle behind Furi. He described the design as triple-I design, which go against everything that AAA titles stand for. The concept of triple-I is simple. Not every game is for you. With the design of most AAA games, which cater to the lowest common denominator at the expense of the design principle of the game, it becomes clear to Thoa that indie game should go the opposite way. Emeric presents this idea with a simple stat graph of AAA and III games, where AAA titles go for a balance of all factor of play, while III games go all out for one extreme factor. All of this is aimed to create maximum satisfaction for the target player by making strong choice that might end up pissing off some group of players, but would be valuable to the player who actually want it. In fact, Emeric points some of this out in his article. He talked about the reason behind unskippable walking section in the game, secret ending of the game which would delete your save file, preventing the player from changing the difficulty throughout the game, and implementing the dash on the release of the dash button instead of when you press it. It is an incredible article that unfortunately I won't have time to get into in this video, but I definitely would recommend that you check it out. Overall, the III design is simple and effective at creating strong video game that might not be for everyone, which work extremely well for Furi. Music. One of the major ways to create identity to your characters, whether in movies, TVs, or video games, is to implement a theme song that adds to the character identity. Furi does this by creating unique themes for each boss characters. Artists are assigned to different bosses and walking sections for said bosses, which allow them to establish a link between the bosses and the music from the walking section leading up to the fight itself. Music in Furi also has dynamic levels that change over each phase of the fight, that gradually elevate the intensity of the fight over the course of the battle. In fact, Toxic Avenger, who is a music composer in Furi, also finds it interesting how the music is crafted differently from other platforms he has worked with. He points out that the music has to gradually shift over the course of the fight, almost adding layer over the course of the music itself.
Les contraintes pour composer de la musique pour un jeu vidéo, c'est un peu particulier parce que il faut que la musique soit évolutive en fonction de tes avancées. C'est pas juste une boucle comme ça, c'est pas juste, c'est plusieurs petites boucles progressives. Et c'est même pas non plus comme un film. Il faut vraiment pouvoir penser à. C'est tout bête, mais si le joueur fait marche arrière, il faut que la musique puisse faire marche arrière elle aussi. Donc c'est assez particulier de travailler. Puis surtout, il faut faire de la musique qui les joueurs pour rester une demi-heure dans la même zone. Il faut essayer de faire une musique qui puisse être supportable à l'oreille pendant une demi-heure. Donc ouais, c'est assez particulier ce processus de création que j'avais jamais vraiment expérimenté parce que j'ai déjà fait de la musique pour les jeux vidéo, mais c'est des jeux vidéo qui ont pris ma musique qui était déjà existante. Mais oui, non, c'est très particulier, mais assez. J'ai appris en fait. J'ai appris.
We can actually see this in the original soundtrack of the game, where at certain part the music would completely shift into an almost entirely different music. And that's because of how the music is utilized within the game itself. Some part of the music is used on certain phases of the boss fight, while another are used on different part of the boss fight, which create different emotion entirely. The developer also makes sure that the music is part of the fight itself. For example, in the fight against the Lion, his attack pattern would actually sync up with the beat of the music. All this is to say Furi succeed in making the music a living part of the game that complement both the satisfaction derived from the gameplay and the narrative through iconic character themes.
Assimilation.